Picture this. You are 22 years old. You are the #1 quarterback in the entire college football transfer portal. You just threw for 27 touchdowns and 2,800 yards in a single season. You tied the all-time school record for total touchdowns at your program. ESPN has you ranked as a top available player heading into the offseason. Texas Tech, a Big 12 powerhouse that just won a conference title, is handing you the keys to their entire program. NFL teams are watching your film. Your future looks limitless. Then your phone rings, and it isn't your agent calling with good news. In the span of just 2 months, from April to June of 2026, Brendan Sorsby went from the most coveted quarterback in college football to a young man who has been banned from the NFL, banned from the CFL, banned from the NCAA, and left without a single professional or collegiate team willing to put his name on a roster. Every door slammed shut, one after another, in 60 days. How does something like that happen? How does a quarterback with legitimate NFL upside, a player talented enough to be graded as a potential third-round pick, end up locked out of every level of the sport he loves? The answer is a story about addiction, about the explosion of sports gambling in America, about the institutions that profit from gambling while punishing the players who fall into its trap, about a legal system that tried to intervene and failed, and ultimately about a 22-year-old kid who made decisions that he cannot undo, no matter how many lawyers he hires. This is a complete story of Brendan Sorsby, and it is more complicated than any headline has told you. To understand how far Brendan Sorsby fell, you first have to understand how hard he climbed to get where he was. Because this is not a story about a kid who was handed anything. Sorsby grew up in Denton, Texas. He played high school ball at Lake Dallas, a program that is not exactly known as a factory for elite college football prospects. He was a dual-threat quarterback, could throw it, could run it, but the recruiting services didn't exactly light up for him. He finished his senior season in 2021, completing 1,271 passing yards with 14 touchdowns and rushing for over 800 yards and 15 more scores. Impressive numbers. But his rating coming out of high school was 3 stars. Not the guy who gets 40 scholarship offers. Not the guy on the cover of recruiting magazines. He got offers from Army, Navy, Fordham, and Abilene Christian. And then, late in the process, Indiana came calling. Indiana was not a powerhouse at the time. This was a program that had been up and down for decades. But Walt Bell had just come in as offensive coordinator, and they saw something in Sorsby that others didn't. He took the offer and enrolled in Bloomington in 2022. He redshirted that first year, appearing in only 1 game, 3 of 6 completions, 8 yards against Penn State. Nobody was writing articles about him yet. His sophomore year, 2023, is where the football story begins to take shape. He became Indiana's starting quarterback. He wasn't perfect, got benched briefly for Taven Jackson in Week 3 against Louisville, but he battled back, reclaimed the job, and finished the year with 1,587 passing yards and 15 touchdowns against just 5 interceptions. He had a 5-touchdown performance against Illinois. He threw a 90-yard touchdown pass against Penn State. He was a dual-threat nightmare who ran for 4 more touchdowns. Indiana coaches were fired at the end of that season, and Sorsby entered the transfer portal in November of 2023. He landed at Cincinnati, and that's where things really took off. In 2024, his first year with the Bearcats, Sorsby became one of the most electric dual-threat quarterbacks in the entire Big 12. He was the only FBS quarterback that season to post both a 425-yard passing game and a 125-yard rushing game. He passed for 2,813 yards, threw 18 touchdowns against just 7 interceptions, and rushed for 447 yards and 9 more scores. His 64% completion rate was 3rd in the entire conference. He earned Big 12 Newcomer of the Year, honorable mention. NFL scouts started showing up to Cincinnati games. Then in 2025, he took it up another level. He threw for 2,800 yards and 27 touchdowns with only 5 interceptions. He rushed for 580 yards and another 9 scores. He had a stretch of 12 consecutive games with at least 2 touchdowns. In one game against Northwestern State, he went a perfect 15 for 15 passing and threw for 5 touchdowns, the second highest QBR in Big 12 history. He finished the season 1 touchdown shy of Desmond Ritter's all-time program record at Cincinnati. He was named PFF Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year and second team All-Big 12. When the season ended, everyone wanted him. He entered the transfer portal and the bidding was intense. Texas Tech won the race, landing the number 2 overall transfer portal prospect in the entire country. He was being compared to quarterbacks who would go in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft. The scouting reports called him a developmental prospect worth a 3rd-round pick, high praise for a college player who wasn't even declaring for the draft yet. He had real NFL upside, a 6'3", 235-pound frame, genuine arm strength, elite mobility, elite ball security. His future was wide open. And then in April of 2026, law enforcement called a sportsbook, and everything changed. The way it came out was almost mundane, a tip from law enforcement to a sportsbook. Then the sportsbook flags certain accounts. Then the NCAA gets notified. Then Texas Tech gets a call in April 2026 asking questions about their new quarterback, and then the whole thing unravels. Here's what the NCAA found, and what Sorsby himself admitted to in court documents, because the details came out in sworn affidavits during his own legal battle. Between September 2022 and at least through his time at Texas Tech in 2026, Brendan Sorsby placed thousands of bets on sporting events using online betting apps. He used accounts registered not just to himself, but to family members and friends, an attempt to spread the activity and avoid detection. Over the course of 4 years, the total amount wagered reached approximately $90,000. But the number that made everyone's stomach drop was this. He placed at least 40 bets on Indiana football while he was on Indiana's roster as a quarterback in 2022. 40 wagers on his own team while he was a member of that team. The court documents showed that his bets on Indiana football stopped at least 2 weeks before his first game action, prior to which he was redshirting, and he insists he never bet against his own team. His agent later emphasized that his average bet was $10, and that the majority of his wagers, once he became a starter, were on other sports like NASCAR and UFC. And critically, Sorsby and his camp maintain he never engaged in point shaving, and there is no evidence that he ever bet against himself or his teams. But none of that nuance mattered in the first wave of reaction. Because in the court of public opinion, and more importantly in the NCAA rulebook, the fact that a player bet on his own sport, on games involving his own team, is one of the most fundamental violations that exists in organized athletics. It is not a gray area. It is not open to interpretation. It is the clearest possible line. Texas Tech announced in late April that Sorsby would be checking himself into an inpatient rehabilitation facility for gambling addiction. He spent 35 days there. He completed the program. He came out with a clinical diagnosis, an anxiety disorder and a gambling addiction. His team framed it from the beginning as a mental health story. A young man who was targeted by an industry that spent billions of dollars marketing gambling apps directly to college-age males, who developed an addiction, who sought treatment when confronted. Sorsby himself said in a public statement, "I now realize the apps controlled me, and I did not control them." And here is where it gets complicated, because that statement is true. The explosion of legal sports betting in America since 2018, when the Supreme Court opened the door for states to legalize it, has created a system where sports betting apps are omnipresent in the lives of college athletes. They are advertised during games, during halftime, on social media feeds. Sorsby was 18 years old when he arrived at Indiana in 2022. He was exactly the demographic that these apps spend the most money targeting. He fits the profile of a gambling addict almost perfectly. Young, male, under pressure, seeking a release valve. His attorneys argued, and clinicians largely agreed, that gambling addiction is a recognized medical condition. The Americans with Disabilities Act protects individuals from discrimination based on disability. Sorsby's legal team built their entire strategy around that argument. But the NCAA wasn't interested in the nuance. In May of 2026, they ruled him permanently ineligible for violating the association's gambling rules. Rules that had been in place precisely because the integrity of competition depends on players not having financial stakes in the outcomes of their own games. The NCAA's position was simple. We have one rule about this, you broke it repeatedly. At 3 different universities, you're done. Sorsby and his camp did not accept that verdict quietly. They hired Jeffrey Kessler, one of the most prominent sports law attorneys in the country, a man who has gone to war with the NCAA before and won, and Kessler came out swinging. The legal strategy was audacious. Instead of accepting the punishment and negotiating some kind of reduced penalty through traditional NCAA channels, Kessler went to federal court and then to a state court in Texas, arguing that the NCAA's blanket ban on Sorsby was a violation of contract law and of his rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The argument was essentially this: Sorsby has a clinical gambling addiction, which is a recognized disability. The NCAA has an obligation to support his well-being rather than simply punish him for conduct driven by that disability. Banning him from his chosen profession, the only thing he has trained for his entire life, causes irreparable harm to his mental health and his earning potential. Texas Tech backed him publicly. University President Lawrence Chovanec sent a letter to the Tech community. We believe his vulnerability deserves to be met with the full weight of this institution's support. The school had assembled an expensive roster and an expensive coaching staff around Sorsby being their quarterback. They had a massive financial interest in this working out, and they stood by him, at least publicly, at least for a while. On June 8, 2026, retired Lubbock County Judge Ken Curry did something that shocked the entire college football world. He granted Sorsby a temporary injunction, preventing the NCAA from enforcing its ban while the legal case played out. Per the ruling, Sorsby would be suspended for Texas Tech's first 2 games, a punishment proposed by Sorsby's own attorneys, and then could return for the Big 12 opener against Houston on September 18th. The judge wrote that Sorsby would suffer probable, imminent, and irreparable injury if not allowed to participate in athletics while his case proceeded. The backlash was immediate and volcanic. Coaches and athletic directors around the country described themselves as disgusted and stunned. Oklahoma's Attorney General called on the Big 12 to suspend Sorsby. The University of Georgia issued a memo saying its athletics program would not schedule future contests against Texas Tech until further notice. The Big 12 itself went to federal court seeking a declaratory judgment that it had the right to impose its own punishment on Sorsby, independent of whatever the Texas state court decided. Multiple Big 12 programs started making noise about boycotting Texas Tech games entirely. One Big 12 head coach, speaking anonymously to ESPN, said, "The hypocrisy is consistent throughout our profession right now. Nobody cares about the betterment of the game and its future anymore. Everybody's in survival mode. That's how it's going to be until it crashes and burns." Meanwhile, the NCAA filed an expedited appeal. Legal analysts noted that even if the appeal took months, Texas Tech could potentially get an entire season of Sorsby quarterbacking in before any final ruling came down, making the formal legal outcome essentially moot from a football standpoint. It was chaos. And then Sorsby's camp made a decision that changed everything. Facing mounting pressure from the Big 12, from the threat of a scheduling boycott that would have crippled Texas Tech's program, from the possibility that the federal courts would overturn the state judge's ruling anyway, Sorsby dropped his lawsuit against the NCAA. Texas Tech parted ways with him, and on June 20th, just days before the June 22nd deadline, Sorsby applied to enter the 2026 NFL Supplemental Draft. The pivot was breathtaking in its speed. One week, he was a step away from starting games in the Big 12. The next week, he was asking the NFL to let him in. The league elected not to hold a supplemental draft at all. The first time since 2023, it had chosen not to. The official reason given was that holding one would become a distraction to teams as they begin training camps. But the letter sent to Sorsby made the real reason crystal clear. Signed by Larry Ferazani, the general counsel of the NFL Management Council, the letter said Sorsby's petition was submitted without any supporting information or documentation, and that it did not demonstrate accountability for your conduct or indicate whether or how you would adhere to the league's rules and policies governing the integrity of competition. The NFL cited public sources indicating that the NCAA had declared Sorsby permanently ineligible based on a sustained pattern of improper gambling activity during your collegiate career at 3 different universities. 3 different universities. Not a one-time mistake. Not a single lapse in judgment. A sustained pattern across 3 schools over 4 years. The letter also quoted Commissioner Roger Goodell's oft-repeated line, "Participation in the NFL is a privilege that carries with it significant responsibilities, including accountability." The message was unmistakable. The NFL was not going to be a soft landing spot for a player who had spent months in legal combat trying to avoid consequences rather than accept them. An NFL source told ESPN bluntly, "His application carries with it a lot of issues. Core of the game integrity issues." And here's where the story gets genuinely ironic, almost uncomfortably so. The NFL has its own complicated relationship with sports gambling. The league partnered with major sportsbooks for years. Owners are permitted to hold up to a 5% investment stake in sports betting companies. The league sells its official game data to betting operators. The NFL has made enormous amounts of money from the same gambling ecosystem that swallowed Brendan Sorsby whole. ESPN's Dan Wetzel noted as much in his column, calling the NFL's moral authority on this subject compromised, while still defending the league's decision as correct. The NFL may not have clean hands on gambling, but even the NFL understood that there is a bright line between the league profiting from betting markets and a player betting on his own team's games. One is a business arrangement. The other is a threat to the fundamental integrity of competition. Sorsby's attorney Jeffrey Kessler immediately called the decision a violation of the CBA and the law and threatened legal action through the NFLPA. The NFLPA acknowledged the statement but pointedly said it had not yet made any determination on whether legal grounds existed to challenge the league's decision. That was not exactly a ringing endorsement of Kessler's position. And then, just 3 days after the NFL shut its doors, the Canadian Football League slammed theirs as well. The CFL issued a statement saying it would not register a contract for Sorsby and that no team would be permitted to add him to its negotiation list. The statement was short and unambiguous. Upholding the integrity of the league and ensuring fair competition are paramount to the CFL. The allegations involving Brendan Sorsby are serious and concerning. At this time, the CFL will not register a contract for him. Not one league, not 2. 3 different governing bodies, the NCAA, the NFL, and the CFL, had now closed their doors to Brendan Sorsby in a span of roughly 6 weeks. The NFL's letter did include one notable passage. Almost as an afterthought, tucked near the end, the league wrote, "By all accounts, you are a talented player with the potential for future success. We encourage you to focus on preparing for possible entry into the NFL through the 2027 NFL Annual Draft." It was the closest thing to a lifeline they offered, and it may end up being the only door that hasn't fully closed. Before we close the book on Brendan Sorsby, we need to have an honest conversation about the world that produced this story. Because Sorsby is 22 years old, and he is not the first college athlete to fall into this trap, and he will not be the last. Since the Supreme Court's 2018 ruling that opened sports gambling to individual states, the industry has exploded in America. Billions of dollars in advertising, promo codes during every halftime show, push notifications engineered by behavioral psychologists to maximize compulsive behavior. The demographic most aggressively targeted by these apps is men aged 18 to 25. College athletes, young, competitive, adrenaline-driven, often under enormous financial and performance pressure, fit that profile almost perfectly. Sorsby arrived at Indiana in 2022 as an 18-year-old from Denton, Texas. He was redshirting, he was not playing, he was sitting in a team meeting room watching other players take the field on Saturdays. By his own account, he had an anxiety disorder, he was under stress, and betting apps were everywhere. Sorsby later said he used them as a release valve, small bets, mostly on other sports, his average wager reportedly around $10 a bet. That is a textbook pattern of addiction. It starts small, it feels controlled, and then slowly it isn't anymore. He is not the only college player this has happened to. Kayshon Boutte, the wide receiver who is now with the New England Patriots, admitted to a nearly identical gambling addiction during his time at LSU. Butte wrote in the Players Tribune, "I'd wake up early in the morning and the first thing I'd do was bet. I'd stay up late and bet. All day, all night. I had insomnia, so if I woke up in the middle of the night, phone next to the bed, I'd bet." Butte was not banned from the NFL. He was drafted, educated about gambling, monitored, and has stayed clean through 3 professional seasons. Hunter Dekkers had a similar gambling issue at Iowa State. He rebuilt through junior college football and is now on the New Orleans Saints roster. The difference between those cases and Sorsby's case is degree. Butte and Dekkers bet on other sports. Sorsby bet on his own team. That is a line, the one line that all of organized athletics agrees you cannot cross. Not because $10 bets on your own team necessarily influence the outcome of a game, but because the moment a player has money on the outcome of their own game, even a small amount, even a positive bet, the integrity of competition is compromised in a way that the public can never fully trust. That is the rule, and it is the right rule, even if the system that enforced it profits from the broader gambling ecosystem. Even if Sorsby is a 22-year-old addict who got swept up in something bigger than himself. The rule exists because without it, there is no sport, there is no competition, there is nothing. What makes the Sorsby case genuinely tragic is that both things can be true at the same time. He made choices that violated the most fundamental rule in sports, and he is a young man with a recognized addiction who was failed by a culture that normalized gambling to the point where it became as ordinary as checking Instagram. Both things are true. The punishment is appropriate, and the circumstances that produced it are worth being angry about. Brendan Sorsby's story is not finished. It doesn't have a clean ending, and it probably won't for a while. He is 22 years old with genuine NFL talent, a recognized addiction, a trail of lawsuits, and a year of competitive football that just evaporated in front of him. Whether he comes back and makes an NFL roster in 2027 or beyond, only he can determine that. Not the lawyers, not the courts, not the agents, him. But here is what I want you to take from this story beyond the headlines. Sports gambling is not going away in this country. It is embedded now. It is in the broadcasts, in the apps, in the culture, and every single year, the NCAA, the NFL, the CBA, every governing body is going to face more situations like Brendan Sorsby, young players who grew up in a world where betting on sports is as normal as watching them. That is a reckoning that the institutions who profit from gambling cannot keep avoiding forever. The NFL can ban Sorsby, the CFL can ban Sorsby, the NCAA already did, but none of those decisions stops the next 18-year-old from sitting in a dorm room at Indiana or Ohio State or Clemson, downloading a betting app at 2 in the morning and placing a $10 wager on his own team's next game, thinking it's harmless, thinking it's just fun, thinking he's in control. The system that banned Brendan Sorsby helped build the conditions that produced him. And until sports acknowledges that honestly, there will be another story exactly like this one, and the kid at the center of it probably won't even see it coming. Do you think Sorsby deserves a second chance in the 2027 draft, or did the NFL make the right call keeping him out entirely? Subscribe if you want more. We cover football culture the way it deserves to be covered. I'll see you in the next one.